The massive drilling ship Voidseeker hung in the dark space above Kepler 442c like a metal moon. Its crew of Kethvar archaeologists had traveled for months to reach this frozen world at the edge of known space. Commander Zexthul stood on the bridge, his 4 eyes studying the ice-covered planet below. The world looked dead, just as their records said it should be. "Sir, the deep scanners show promising mineral deposits," reported Science Officer Veltar, her clawed fingers dancing across the control panel. "Rare metals in the lower crust. This expedition will make the Empire wealthy." Zexthul nodded, his scaled head catching the light from the displays. The Kethavar had been mining dead worlds for 3 centuries, ever since they had become the dominant power in this part of the galaxy. It was honest work, and it kept their growing empire fed and strong. "Begin the descent," he ordered. "Set up the main drilling platform on the southern continent. The ice looks thinner there." The Voidseeker descended through the thin atmosphere, its massive bulk casting shadows on the endless white surface below. Within hours, the ship had landed and extended its drilling arms deep into the frozen ground. The Kethvar crew worked efficiently as they had done on dozens of other worlds. For 3 days, the drilling went smoothly. The massive machines bit through ice, then rock, then more ice. The planet seemed to be exactly what they expected, a cold, empty ball of rock and minerals waiting to be harvested. Then, on the 4th day, everything changed. "Commander!" Veltar's voice was sharp with excitement. "The drill has hit something. Strange, it's not rock or ice." Zexthul hurried to her station. On the screen, he could see the feed from the drill head, now buried 3 kilometers below the surface. Instead of the gray rock they expected, the drill was cutting through something smooth and metallic. "Pull back the drill," Zexthul ordered. "Send down the survey probe." The small probe descended through the hole the drill had made. Its lights pierced the darkness below, revealing something that made the entire crew gather around the screens in shocked silence. They were looking at a vast underground chamber. The walls were made of some kind of metal that still gleamed despite being buried for who knew how long. Strange symbols covered the surfaces, carved deep into the metal in patterns none of them recognized. "This is not natural," whispered Engineer Colvin, his voice filled with awe. "Someone built this." "But who?" Veltar asked. "Our records show no intelligent life ever existed on this world." The probe moved deeper into the chamber, its cameras recording everything. The space was huge, big enough to hold their entire ship, and it was not empty. Strange objects lined the walls, things that looked like they might once have been machines or furniture, though their purpose was unclear. "There," Zexthul pointed at the screen. "Take the probe there." The camera focused on what appeared to be an opening in the far wall. As the probe approached, they could see it was actually a tunnel, leading even deeper into the planet. "How far does this go?" Colvin wondered aloud. They had their answer soon enough. The tunnel opened into another chamber, then another. Each room was filled with more strange objects and covered with more of those mysterious symbols. The probe's instruments detected power sources. Somehow, incredibly, some of the technology down there was still active after all this time. "Commander," Veltar said, her voice tight with worry, "I'm reading energy signatures unlike anything in our databases. This technology, it's not from any species we know." Zexthul stared at the screens, his mind racing. In all their years of expansion across the galaxy, the Kethvar had found many dead worlds, but they had always been truly dead. Empty rock and ice with no signs that intelligent life had ever existed. This was different. This was impossible. "Prepare the descent team," he ordered finally. "Full exploration gear. We're going down there." "Sir," Veltar hesitated. "Perhaps we should report this to the Empire first. Get additional ships, more specialist—" "No." Zexthul's voice was firm. "We investigate first. If this turns out to be nothing, we'll look like fools for calling in the fleet. If it's something important, we'll be the ones who discovered it." Within an hour, a team of 6 Kethvar had descended through the drill shaft and entered the underground complex. Their suit lights cut through the darkness, revealing even more details than the probe had captured. The craftsmanship of the walls was incredible. Smooth metal surfaces joined so perfectly that the seams were nearly invisible. "These symbols," Veltar said, running her gloved hand across one wall. "They're everywhere. It's like writing, but not like any language we've ever seen." The team moved carefully through the chambers, their instruments recording everything. Each room seemed to serve a different purpose, though what those purposes were remained a mystery. Some contained rows of empty shelves. Others held objects that might have been tools, though tools designed for hands very different from Kethvar claws. It was in the fifth chamber that they found the first clear sign of who had built this place. "Commander," Engineer Colvin called from across the room. "You need to see this." He was standing in front of what appeared to be a flat surface mounted on the wall. As Zexthul approached, the surface suddenly came to life, glowing with soft light. Images appeared, still pictures that seemed to move and change. The images showed creatures unlike any the Kethvar had ever seen. They walked on two legs, like the Kethvar, but they were shorter and had only two eyes. Their skin was smooth, without scales, and came in different shades of brown and pink. They had small mouths and strange fur growing only on the tops of their heads. "What are they?" Veltar whispered. The images continued to change, showing these strange beings in what appeared to be daily life. They worked together, building things, caring for smaller versions of themselves that must have been their young. They showed emotion in ways that seemed almost familiar, touching each other, making expressions with their faces. "They're intelligent," Zexthul said quietly. "These creatures, whoever they were, they built all this." More images flashed by. The beings working on machines, studying star charts, looking up at the sky with what seemed like longing. And then, the images stopped, leaving the Kethvar team staring at a dark screen. "There has to be more," Veltar said. "This can't be all of it." She was right. As they moved deeper into the complex, they found more and more chambers. Some were clearly living spaces, with furniture sized for the strange, two-eyed beings. Others looked like workshops or laboratories, and everywhere the same mysterious symbols covered the walls like a language they couldn't read. But the most shocking discovery was still to come. At the very center of the complex, they found a chamber unlike all the others. This one was filled with devices that were clearly still working. Lights blinked steadily, and a low humming sound filled the air. "The power source," Colvin said, in amazement. "After all this time, it's still running." Zexthul looked around the chamber with growing unease. Who were these beings? Where had they come from? And most importantly, where had they gone? The complex was clearly built to last, designed by creatures who expected to live here for a long time, but there was no sign of what had happened to them. "Sir," Veltar's voice was barely a whisper. "Look at this." She was standing in front of another display that had activated when they entered. This one showed not still images, but what looked like star charts. And there, in the center of the display, was a star system that looked familiar. Too familiar. It was their home system. The Kethvar home system shone with perfect accuracy. Somehow these unknown beings had known exactly where the Kethvar Empire was located. The implication sent a chill through Zexthul's body. Who were these creatures? And what did they want with his people? The exploration team spent the next day carefully examining every device in the central chamber. Engineer Colvin was the first to figure out how to activate more of the strange technology. When he touched a series of symbols on what appeared to be a control panel, the entire room came alive with light and sound. "Careful," Commander Zexthul warned, but Colvin was already stepping back as holographic images filled the air around them. The images were moving now, not still pictures, like before. The Kethvar team watched in fascination as the strange two-eyed beings appeared to walk among them, going about their daily activities as if they were still alive. The holograms were so clear and detailed that Veltar actually stepped aside when one of the creatures seemed to walk directly toward her. "It's like looking into the past," she whispered. The holographic beings moved with purpose and intelligence. They operated complex machines with hands that had 5 separate digits instead of claws. They communicated with each other using sounds. That seemed organized and meaningful, though the Kethvar couldn't understand any of it. They're showing us their history, Zexthul realized. This is how they lived. The scenes changed, showing different areas of the underground complex. The Kethvar could see that the place had once been full of life. Hundreds of the strange beings had lived here, working together, raising their young, building new things. It was clearly a thriving community, but there was something else about the images that made Zexthul uneasy. These beings didn't act like they were on a normal colony world. There was a sense of urgency to their movements, a tension in their body language that suggested they were hiding from something. Look at their faces, Veltar pointed out. They're afraid. She was right. Even though the Kethvar couldn't read the expressions of these alien features very well, there was something in the way the beings held themselves, in how they kept looking upward toward the surface, that spoke of fear. The holographic record continued, showing the beings working on what appeared to be defensive systems. They installed thick barriers over entrances, set up devices that looked like weapons, and created layers of protection around their living areas. Whatever they were hiding from, they were taking it very seriously. Colvin activated another control panel, and the images shifted to show the beings working on something new. A vast chamber filled with strange pods. The creatures were placing things inside the pods, sealing them carefully. What are those? Veltar wondered aloud. The answer came as the hologram focused on one of the pods. Inside, they could see one of the beings lying very still, connected to tubes and wires. It looked like some kind of sleeping chamber. They're preserving themselves, Zexthul said with growing amazement. They built these things to survive whatever was coming. The holographic record jumped forward in time. Now the complex looked different, emptier. Most of the beings were gone, but a few remained, working desperately on final preparations. They moved with the efficiency of people who knew they were running out of time. The images showed these last beings sealing themselves into the sleeping pods, one by one. The final hologram was of a single creature, the last one awake, activating systems throughout the complex before approaching the final unused pod. Just before the being sealed itself inside, it looked directly at where the Kethvar team was standing. The expression on its strange face was unmistakable, hope mixed with desperate sadness. Then the hologram ended, leaving the chamber in silence. They knew, Veltar said quietly. Somehow they knew someone would find this place eventually. Zexthul felt a chill run through his scaled body. The star charts showing their home system suddenly made more sense. These beings hadn't just known where the Kethvar came from, they had been expecting them. Over the following days, the team activated more holographic records throughout the complex. Each one showed them more about these remarkable beings and how they had lived. The creatures were clearly very intelligent, perhaps even more advanced than the Kethvar in some ways. Their technology was different but sophisticated, designed to last for incredibly long periods of time. The beings called themselves something that sounded like humans in their strange language. They had come from somewhere far away, bringing with them the knowledge to build this incredible underground city. But why had they hidden here? What were they afraid of? The answer began to emerge as the team found records that showed the surface of the planet. In the holograms, they could see that the world hadn't always been the frozen wasteland it was today. There had once been oceans and green land, a beautiful world that could have supported life easily. What happened to it? Colvin asked, staring at the images of the planet as it had been. The holographic record showed them. The surface had been destroyed, burned from orbit by massive weapons. The oceans had boiled away, the land had been scorched until nothing could grow. The planet had been deliberately turned into the frozen dead world the Kethvar had found. But who had done such a terrible thing? And why? The humans in the recording seemed to know their world was doomed. The final surface images showed them, evacuating everything they could into the underground complex, sealing it away before the destruction began. They had watched their beautiful world die from these hidden chambers, powerless to stop it. They were refugees, Zexthul realized. This wasn't their home world. They came here fleeing from something, and then this place was destroyed too. The more records they found, the more impressed the Kethvar became with these humans. Faced with the destruction of their hiding place, the beings hadn't given up. Instead, they had adapted, building systems to survive underground indefinitely. They had created technology to preserve themselves for however long it might take for the danger to pass. The humans had planned for everything. They had stockpiled resources, created systems to recycle air and water, and built the sleeping pods to keep themselves alive through what might be centuries of waiting. It was the most impressive display of long-term thinking and survival planning the Kethvar had ever seen. "How long have they been sleeping?" Veltar asked, studying the readings from the chamber with the pods. Colvin checked his instruments. "Based on the power consumption patterns, I'd say at least 300 years. Maybe more. 300 years. The humans had been waiting in their underground tomb for 3 centuries, trusting that someday someone would find them. The dedication and hope required for such a plan was beyond anything in Kethvar experience. But there was still one question that bothered Zexthul. In all the records they had found, they had seen the destruction of this world and the humans' preparation for long-term survival. But they had never seen what the humans were originally running from, what had driven them to this remote world in the first place. As if responding to his thoughts, Colvin called out from across the chamber. "Commander, I found something. A sealed data core, much older than the others. The data core was different from the other recording devices. It was heavily protected, buried deep in the computer systems like something the humans had wanted to preserve above all else. When Colvin finally managed to activate it, the holographic images that appeared were different too. These showed scenes not of the underground complex, but of somewhere else entirely. A beautiful blue and green world with vast cities and billions of humans. The images showed a thriving civilization, advanced and peaceful, and then the images showed that world's death. The Kethvar team watched in horrified fascination as the human homeworld was destroyed from orbit. Massive ships rained fire from the sky, turning cities to ash and boiling the oceans. It was systematic and thorough, the complete destruction of an entire world and everyone on it. The attacking ships were clearly visible in the records, their design unmistakable. They were Kethvar ships. Zexthul stared at the hologram, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The ships destroying the human homeworld bore the symbols of the Kethvar Empire. This wasn't some unknown enemy the humans had been fleeing from. It was them. "That's impossible," Veltar whispered. "We would remember something like this." But, even as she said it, Zexthul was remembering fragments from the Imperial histories. 300 years ago, during the Great Expansion, there had been worlds that had resisted Kethvar rule. Worlds that had been made examples of, to show others what happened to those who opposed the Empire. The records had always said those worlds contained only primitive beings, barely intelligent. But looking at the human civilization in the holograms, that clearly wasn't true. The humans had been advanced, organized, and peaceful, and the Kethvar Empire had destroyed them anyway. The final images from the data core showed small groups of humans escaping their dying world in desperate flight, ships packed with refugees fleeing into deep space, looking for somewhere, anywhere, they might be safe from the Kethvar Empire. One of those refugee groups had found this world, hidden at the edge of known space. They had tried to build a new life here, only to have the Empire find them again and destroy their new home as well. But this time, a few had been ready. A few had managed to hide deep enough to survive. And now, 3 centuries later, their destroyers had found them again. The silence in the chamber stretched on as the 3 Kethvar stared at the frozen holographic image of their own ships destroying the human homeworld. Commander Zexthul felt something he had never experienced before, a deep shame that seemed to burn in his chest like acid. "This can't be right," Veltar said, her voice shaking. "The Empire doesn't destroy entire civilizations. We bring order to the galaxy." But even as she spoke, Colvin was accessing more files from the data core. The evidence mounted with each new record. Fleet movements from 3 centuries ago. battle reports that had been classified and forgotten, orders from Imperial Command to cleanse resistant worlds completely. The humans hadn't just kept records of their own destruction. They had somehow obtained copies of Kethvar military documents, probably intercepted during their desperate attempts to understand why they were being hunted. The files showed the cold, methodical planning that had gone into wiping out human civilization. Operation Final Shore. Zexthul read from one of the documents, his voice hollow. Complete sterilization of the human species. No survivors to be permitted. The human records filled in details that the sanitized Kethvar reports had left out. The Empire hadn't just destroyed military targets. They had systematically hunted down every human settlement, every refugee ship, every hidden colony. It had been genocide on a scale that was almost impossible to comprehend. Billions of humans had died. An entire species with all their art, knowledge, and culture had been nearly erased from the galaxy. Why? Veltar whispered. What had they done to deserve this? The answer was in the files, cold and bureaucratic. The humans had refused to submit to Kethvar rule. They had insisted on maintaining their independence, their own government, their own way of life. To the Empire of 3 centuries ago, this had been intolerable. They had decided it was easier to destroy the humans completely than to deal with a species that wouldn't bow down, but the humans had fought back in their own way. Instead of building weapons or armies, they had focused on survival. The records showed how they had scattered across the galaxy, trying to find places where they could hide and preserve their species. Most of these attempts had failed, tracked, down and eliminated by Kethvar forces. This world had been one of their last hopes. A small group of humans had found the remote planet and tried to build a new home. They had lived on the surface for decades, creating a beautiful settlement, trying to rebuild their civilization far from Kethvar space. But somehow, the Empire had found them again. The orbital bombardment had been swift and merciless, turning the world into the frozen wasteland the Kethvar had discovered. The Empire had assumed they had killed everyone, marked the world as cleansed in their records, and moved on. They had been wrong. The humans had learned from the destruction of their homeworld. This time, some of them had been prepared. Look at this, Colvin said, activating another set of records. They knew the attack was coming. They had scouts, early warning systems. They saw the Kethvar ships approaching and had time to get some people into the underground complex. These holographic records showed the final days before the bombardment. Humans working frantically to save whatever they could. Not just people, but books, art, music, seeds from their gardens, recordings of their history. They had tried to preserve everything that made them human, knowing it might be the last chance to do so. Not everyone had made it underground in time. The record showed families saying goodbye, knowing they would never see each other again. Parents sealing their children into the sleeping pods while staying behind themselves to maintain the systems. The sacrifices had been heartbreaking and heroic. How many made it underground? Zexthul asked. The numbers were in the files. Of the 10,000 humans living on the surface, only a few hundred had made it to the underground complex, and of those only a few dozen had been placed in the sleeping pods for long-term survival. The rest had stayed awake, maintaining the complex and caring for the sleepers until they grew old and died. The final holographic records showed these brave volunteers working until their last days, ensuring the sleeping pods remained functional and the complex stayed hidden. They knew they would never wake up, Veltar said, her voice full of wonder. They chose to sacrifice themselves so a few might survive. The scope of human determination was staggering. For 3 centuries, automated systems had maintained the complex powered by fusion reactors the humans had designed to run for millennia. Every system had backups, and the backups had backups. The humans had planned for every possible failure. But the most impressive discovery was still ahead. As the team explored deeper into the complex, they found chambers they hadn't seen before. These areas were different. Not living spaces or workshops, but something that looked almost like a school. The walls were covered with human writing, but also with symbols that looked familiar. It took Zexthul a moment to realize what he was looking at. They learned our language, he said in amazement. Somehow they learned to read and write Kethavar. The evidence was everywhere once they knew what to look for. The humans hadn't just hidden and hoped to survive like they had studied their enemies. They had intercepted Kethavar communications, decoded their language, and learned everything they could about Kethavar culture and society. There were detailed files about Kethavar technology, social structures, even psychological profiles of typical Kethavar behavior. The humans had been preparing for the possibility that someday they might encounter Kethavar again. But what they had prepared for wasn't revenge. Veltar found the files that explained the humans' long-term plans. They were written in both human symbols and Kethavar script, as if the authors wanted to make sure their eventual discoverers could understand them. Project Reconciliation, she read aloud. Preparation for peaceful contact with post-expansion, Kethavar civilization. The files outlined an incredible plan. The humans had studied Kethavar history and noticed patterns in their expansion. The empire went through cycles, periods of aggressive conquest, followed by longer periods of stability and cultural development. The humans had calculated that eventually the Kethavar would evolve beyond their conquest phase and become more open to peaceful coexistence. They had been waiting for that day. They weren't just surviving, Colvin said in disbelief. They were waiting for us to become better people. The human plans were detailed and thoughtful. They had prepared presentations about their culture, their technology, their philosophy. They had developed proposals for how humans and Kethavar might work together, how their different strengths could complement each other. Most incredibly, they had prepared forgiveness. The files contained detailed analyses of why the Kethavar had acted as they did 3 centuries ago, placing the blame not on individual evil, but on cultural and historical forces that drove the empire's expansion. The humans had decided that revenge would only perpetuate the cycle of violence that had nearly destroyed them. Instead, they had chosen to wait for a better future. They studied us better than we know ourselves, Zexthul said, reading through the psychological profiles. They understood why we did what we did, even when we didn't. The human analysis of Kethavar culture was uncomfortably accurate. They had identified the insecurities that drove the Empire's need for control, the fear of chaos that made Kethavar leaders see independence movements as existential threats. But they had also identified the Kethavar capacity for honor, loyalty, and justice when not driven by fear. The humans believed that a mature Kethavar civilization, one that had achieved stability and security, would be capable of regret for past actions and willing to build a better future. Did they get it right? Veltar asked quietly. Are we the Kethavar they were waiting for? Zexthul looked around at his team. 3 days ago, they had been simple archaeologists on a mining expedition. Now, they were faced with the greatest moral crisis in their species' history. They had discovered that their empire had committed genocide, and the victims had responded not with hatred, but with hope for redemption. The question was whether that hope had been justified. The answer came from an unexpected source. Deep in the human files, they found records of other Kethavar expeditions, mining ships and exploration vessels that had visited dead worlds over the past century. The humans had been monitoring Kethavar communications for decades, watching and waiting. What they had seen had given them hope. The modern Kethavar Empire was different from the one that had destroyed them, still proud and sometimes arrogant, but no longer driven by the need to dominate or destroy. The current generation of Kethavar had grown up in a stable, secure empire that no longer saw other species as threats to be eliminated. They've been watching us, Veltar realized. All this time, they've been studying us, waiting to see if we had changed enough. The final files contained the humans' conclusion. Based on their observations, they believed the time was right for contact. The Kethavar who would eventually find them would be capable of facing the truth about their history and working toward a better future. They were waiting for us, Zexthul said softly. Not just any Kethavar, but specifically us. They calculated that eventually people like us would find this place. The discovery of the sleeping chamber happened on the 7th day of exploration. Engineer Colvin had been following power conduits deeper into the complex when his instruments detected something unusual, a massive energy draw coming from a section they hadn't explored yet. "Commander," he called over the communication system. "You need to see this. There's something big down here, and it's still active." Zexthul and Veltar hurried through the corridors to join him. The section Colvin had found was different from the rest of the complex. The walls here were thicker, the doors more heavily sealed. Everything about the area suggested that whatever was inside was considered critically important. The main door required 3 different access codes to open, but the humans had left instructions for their eventual discoverers. Written in both human script and carefully translated Kethavar, the message was clear: for those who come seeking truth rather than conquest. When the massive door finally opened, the Kethavar team found themselves looking into a chamber that took their breath away. Row after row of sleeping pods lined the walls, each one softly glowing with internal lights. Status displays showed steady readings, and the air hummed with the sound of life support systems. "They're still alive," Veltar whispered in amazement. "After all this time, they're actually still alive." 12 pods were active, their occupants floating in preservation fluid that had kept them perfectly preserved for 3 centuries. Through the transparent covers, the Kethavar could see the sleeping humans, men, women, and even a few who appeared to be adolescents when they had entered the pods. The age range was deliberate, Zexthul realized, reading the information displays. They selected people who could rebuild their civilization if they were the only survivors. Each pod contained detailed information about its occupant. Scientists, engineers, teachers, doctors. The humans had chosen carefully, making sure the sleeping survivors had all the knowledge needed to restart their species if necessary. But they had also included artists, musicians, and storytellers, showing that they valued more than just practical skills. The central control system showed that the pods could be awakened at any time. The humans had built-in safety protocols, but they had also included instructions for emergency activation. It was clear they had intended for others to be able to wake them when the time was right. "Should we?" Colvin asked, his voice uncertain. "I mean, what do we tell them when they wake up?" It was the question that had been haunting Zexthul since they discovered the truth about human history. How do you face people whose entire species you helped to destroy? How do you explain that their 300-year wait for justice might be ending with the arrival of their former enemies? The decision was taken out of their hands. As they studied the control systems, warning lights began flashing throughout the chamber. The sleeping pods were detecting the presence of multiple life forms and interpreting it as a sign that the waiting period was over. Automated systems that had been dormant for centuries began powering up. The humans had programmed their technology to begin the awakening process automatically under certain conditions, and the arrival of the Kethavar team had triggered those conditions. "We can't stop it," Colvin said, frantically checking the controls. "The awakening sequence has started. They're going to wake up whether we want them to or not." The process took several hours. The Kethavar team watched in fascination as the sleeping pods slowly brought their occupants back to consciousness. The humans had planned even this carefully. The awakening was gradual, giving the sleepers' bodies time to adjust after centuries of suspended animation. The first pod to open contained a human woman who appeared to be middle-aged by their species standards. She sat up slowly, breathing deeply as her eyes adjusted to the light. For a moment she looked confused, as if trying to remember where she was. Then she saw the Kethavar team standing nearby, and her expression changed completely. Zexthul had expected fear, anger, maybe panic. Instead, the human woman looked at them with what appeared to be calm curiosity. She said something in her own language, then paused and tried again in perfectly pronounced Kethavar. "Are you the ones who found us?" she asked. The question was so simple, so reasonable, that Zexthul found himself answering automatically. "Yes, we're archaeologists from the Kethavar Empire. We were mining this world when we discovered your complex." The woman nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I am Dr. Sarah Chen. I was the project coordinator for the preservation program." She looked around the chamber as more pods began opening. "How long have we been sleeping?" 312 years. Veltar answered. Dr. Chen absorbed this information without visible distress. Longer than we hoped, but within acceptable parameters. The question is whether you are the Kethvar we were waiting for, or if we need to go back to sleep for another few centuries. The casual way she spoke about such monumental decisions left the Kethvar team speechless. Here was a woman who had just awakened after 3 centuries to find her species' former enemies standing over her, and she was discussing it like a routine matter. More humans were awakening now. Each one sat up, oriented themselves quickly, and looked to Dr. Chen for guidance. Their discipline and calm were remarkable. These people had clearly prepared mentally for this exact situation. Status report, Dr. Chen requested from the others in their own language. As the newly awakened humans responded, Zexathul was struck by their efficiency. In minutes, they had established that all 12 pods had functioned correctly, and that everyone was in good health despite the long sleep. Then Dr. Chen turned back to the Kethvar team. Before we proceed, I need to ask you some questions. Have you accessed our historical records? Yes, Zexthul admitted. We know what the Empire did to your people. We know about the genocide. He expected anger, accusations, demands for justice. Instead, Dr. Chen simply nodded. And what was your reaction to learning this information? The question caught Zexthul off guard. We were horrified, ashamed. We had no idea our empire had done such things. That's what we hoped, Dr. Chen said quietly. Our analysis suggested that modern Kethvar would react with moral distress rather than justification or denial. It's one of the reasons we believed contact might be possible. Another human, a younger man, approached and spoke quietly to Dr. Chen in their language. She listened, then addressed the Kethvar again. My colleague, Dr. Martinez, has been reviewing your equipment signatures. You're from a mining operation, not a military expedition. This suggests the current empire is more focused on resource development than conquest. Is that accurate? Veltar found her voice. Yes, the empire hasn't engaged in aggressive expansion for over 2 centuries. We're archaeologists and engineers, not soldiers. Excellent. Dr. Chen seemed genuinely pleased. That aligns with our projections. We calculated that the empire would eventually transition from an expansion phase to a consolidation phase, focusing on development rather than conquest. The conversation felt surreal to Zexthul. These humans had awakened to find representatives of the species that had nearly destroyed them, and they were conducting what amounted to a diplomatic interview. You don't seem angry, he said finally. Dr. Chen considered this. We spent decades preparing for this moment. Anger is a luxury we couldn't afford. Our species' survival depends on making rational decisions based on current reality, not past grievances. She gestured to her awakened companions. Everyone in this room volunteered for the preservation program, knowing they might wake up to exactly this situation. We've had 300 years to think about how we wanted to handle it. And how do you want to handle it? Colvin asked. That depends on you, Dr. Chen replied. We have proposals for peaceful coexistence, plans for limited contact, and protocols for returning to sleep if necessary. What we decide to do next depends on who you are and what you represent. The human directness was both admirable and unnerving. They had awakened to find their former enemies, and instead of panic or revenge, they were ready to negotiate. What do you need from us to make that determination? Zexthul asked. Dr. Chen smiled, the first emotional expression he had seen from any of the humans. An honest conversation. We need to understand what the modern Kethvar Empire is like, what your personal values are, and whether you're prepared to acknowledge the truth about what happened to our people. She paused, looking at each of the Kethvar in turn. Most importantly, we need to know if you're here as conquerors, researchers, or potential friends. The weight of the question settled on Zexathul's shoulders. The answer he gave could determine the fate of the last surviving humans in the galaxy. But as he looked at Dr. Chen and her companions, people who had sacrificed everything and waited 3 centuries for this moment, he knew there was only one answer he could give. We came here as researchers, he said slowly. But I think we'd Like to leave as friends if you'll have us. Dr. Chen's smile widened. Then let's talk about the future. The conversation that followed changed everything for the Kethvar team. Dr. Chen and her companions didn't waste time on recriminations or demands. Instead, they focused on understanding the current state of the galaxy and what role humans might play in it. We've been monitoring Kethvar communications for decades, explained Dr. Martinez, the younger human who had been reviewing their equipment. Your empire has changed significantly since the destruction of our homeworld. The expansion. Wars ended over 2 centuries ago, and the focus shifted to internal development and peaceful resource acquisition. You've been watching us? Veltar asked. Passively, Dr. Chen clarified. We intercepted general broadcasts, news transmissions, cultural programs. We wanted to understand what the Empire had become without revealing our existence. She activated a display that showed detailed charts and analysis. What we found gave us hope. Modern Kethvar society values learning, discovery, and scientific advancement over military conquest. Your archaeological expeditions far outnumber your military operations. Most encouraging of all, we found evidence of growing cultural diversity within the Empire. The humans had been incredibly thorough in their observations. They knew about recent Kethvar cultural movements, political developments, even popular entertainment. It was clear they had spent decades preparing for this moment. We identified you specifically 3 months ago. Dr. Chen continued. Your team's reputation for careful archaeological work and ethical research made you ideal candidates for first contact. Zexthol felt a chill. You chose us? In a sense. We monitored the communications traffic when your expedition was approved, and calculated a high probability that you would discover our complex. The placement of our energy signatures wasn't accidental. We wanted to be found by researchers, not military personnel. The implications were staggering. The humans had manipulated events to ensure they would be discovered by people they judged capable of handling the truth responsibly. It was a level of long-term planning that left the Kethvar team speechless. But the most remarkable moment came when Dr. Chen activated another display, this one showing detailed plans and proposals. We call it the Reconstruction Project, she said. Our plan for rebuilding human civilization, with Kethvar assistance. The plans were extraordinary in their scope and ambition. The humans had designed a complete strategy for species recovery, from genetic diversity management to cultural preservation to technological development. But what made it truly remarkable was that it assumed cooperation with the Kethvar Empire. You want to work with us? Colvin asked in amazement. After what we did to your people? Dr. Chen looked at him with patience and understanding. What your ancestors did, she corrected gently. You weren't responsible for the actions of the Empire 3 centuries ago. Judging you for those crimes would be as unfair as judging us for the actions of ancient human civilizations. She gestured to her companions. We spent years debating this question before entering the sleeping pods. Some argued for isolationism, finding a way to rebuild human civilization in secret, far from Kethvar space. Others wanted revenge, to use our advanced preservation technology to outlast the Empire and reclaim our worlds. What changed your minds? Veltar asked. Practicality, said Dr. Martinez. Revenge would have required resources we didn't have, and would likely have resulted in our complete extinction. Isolationism would have condemned humanity to a marginal existence on the fringes of the galaxy. Dr. Chen nodded. But more than that, we realized that cooperation offered the best path forward for both our species. Humans and Kethvar have complementary strengths. Your people excel at organization, large-scale planning, and resource management. Humans have shown particular aptitude for adaptation, innovation, and long-term survival. The display changed to show projections of what joint human Kethvar colonies might look like. The plans were detailed and thoughtful, showing how the two species could work together while maintaining their distinct cultural identities. We're not asking to be absorbed into the Empire, Dr. Chen explained. We're proposing a partnership, autonomous human settlements under Kethvar protection, contributing our knowledge and skills to mutual benefit. The proposal addressed every concern the Kethvar team could imagine. Questions of technology sharing, territorial boundaries, cultural preservation, and dispute resolution had all been thought through in remarkable detail. "You've planned for everything," Zexathul said in wonder. "We've had 3 centuries to think about it," Dr. Chen replied with a slight smile. "And we've learned to plan very carefully for survival, but the most impressive aspect of the human proposal wasn't its thoroughness, it was its generosity. Despite everything that had happened, the humans were offering to share their most advanced technologies with the Kethvar. Their preservation systems, their long-term planning methodologies, their survival technologies, all would be made available to their former enemies. "Why?" Beltar asked. "Why offer us so much?" The answer came from the youngest of the awakened humans, a woman who appeared barely adult by human standards. "Because that's what humans do," she said simply. "We adapt, we survive, and we try to make the future better than the past." Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. "Lisa speaks for all of us. We've learned that survival isn't just about preserving our bodies or even our culture. It's about preserving the values that make us human. Cooperation, hope, the belief that people can change for the better." She looked directly at Zexthul. "Your empire nearly destroyed us 3 centuries ago. But the people standing in this room are not the same as those who gave those orders. You've proven that by your reaction to learning the truth. You felt shame, regret, a desire to make amends. That tells us more about modern Kethvar character than any amount of surveillance could." The conversation continued for hours, covering every aspect of the proposed partnership. The humans had answers for everything, solutions for problems the Kethvar hadn't even thought to raise. Their preparation was so thorough it was almost frightening, but as the day wore on, Zexthul began to understand what he was really witnessing. The humans hadn't just survived genocide. They had used the experience to become something greater than they had been before. They had transformed their greatest trauma into their greatest strength. "You've done the impossible," he said finally. "You've turned hatred into hope." Dr. Chen shook her head. "Hatred was never an option for us. Hatred would have meant letting the Empire win, letting them destroy not just our bodies but our souls as well. We chose hope because hope was the only way to remain human." As the meeting drew to a close, the humans made their final proposal. They wanted Zexathul and his team to return to the Empire as ambassadors, to prepare the way for formal contact. The process would be gradual, carefully managed to avoid panic or misunderstandings. "It won't be easy," Dr. Chen warned. "There will be Kethvar who react badly to learning about the genocide. Some may argue that awakening us was a mistake, that sleeping humans should have been left sleeping. And some will want to finish what was started 3 centuries ago," Dr. Martinez added quietly. But the humans had plans for that too. They had contingencies for every possible reaction, from full acceptance to violent rejection. If necessary, they could return to the sleeping pods and wait for another opportunity. They had survived this long. They could survive longer if needed. "What do you need from us?" Zexthul asked. "A promise," Dr. Chen said. "Promise us that whatever happens next, you'll remember that we chose cooperation over conflict. Promise that you'll tell our story truthfully, not as a tale of revenge or conquest, but as proof that people can change, that enemies can become friends." The promise was easy to make. Zexthul and his team had witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had responded to near extinction not with bitterness, but with determination to build a better future. As they prepared to leave the complex and return to their ship, Dr. Chen made one final request. "When you tell our story to your people, make sure they understand one thing," she said. "We didn't survive for 300 years just to live again. We survived to prove that hope is stronger than hatred, that cooperation is more powerful than conquest." She smiled at the 3 Kethvar who had found them. "We survived to show the galaxy that no matter how dark things become, there's always a chance for a better tomorrow. That's what makes us human." As the Void Seeker lifted off from the frozen planet, carrying the most important discovery in galactic history, Zexthal looked back at the world that had hidden its secret for so long. Below the surface, 12 humans were beginning the long process of rebuilding their civilization, not in isolation but in partnership with their former enemies. It was truly unthinkable, and it was beautiful. The message they would carry back to the Empire was simple but revolutionary. Humanity had not been conquered. They had been transformed. And in their transformation, they offered the galaxy a new way forward. The age of conquest was over. The age of cooperation had begun, and it had started with 12 humans who had chosen hope over hatred, and 3 Kethvar who had chosen to listen.